Hello, this is First Fire Non-Assault Move. Welcome back to the 29th video in the War in the East series. Let's get a situation report. It is 23 July 1942. Let's start with the bottom line up front. Our closing remarks had us looking closely at our progress to date. As we know, the German 1942 spring-summer offensive got off to a very slow start. It was interrupted at least twice. The most recent interruption had the mud week last turn. So revisiting the plan to have the main axis of advance in Army Group Center and what we could achieve at this point, having our forces locked in mud, unable to maneuver out of the situation, and clearly we can see what the Soviets were able to manage from the initial success we had penetrating their lines to the point of the Germans being stuck in mud. And then now this is the picture we have of after the Germans have completed all of their move for the week of 23 July. Clearly, there was no chance to capitalize on any of our early success with the reopening of our offensive. Therefore, after looking closely along the entire front, looking at all potential opportunities, we called a halt to our main axis of advance. The attacking units were ordered to halt, regroup, and gracefully withdraw as best as possible. I have to say that I'm more than pleased at the situation right now as it stands, with us able to extricate ourselves from that elongated front we had right around, in and around Vyazma. Take a closer look. Our lead Panzer Division at one point was 110 miles from Moscow. Since then, the greater bulk of our attacking forces have been sent south. This is the preliminary outlook for the front, in particular the northern shoulder of Army Group Center's northern flank. Very eerily similar to where we ended off in 1941. So Army Group North, this sector of the front has not changed. In the early going, we started to attack north into the Tallinn region. Soviet forces were just strong enough to prevent any adequate gains. We were just losing supply and manpower, so we pulled back to this line, taking advantage, our own advantage of rivers. Goodness knows the Soviets are taking great advantage of the innumerable rivers. A little saltiness there. So we set up a very straight defensive line here, have remained in place, no attacks. If we shift south a little bit around the Pskov area, we did attack, some localized attacks. That is just to keep the Soviets off balance, not allow them to dig in to any great degree in this area where they have some significant forces, or had significant forces built up in the last couple of turns. You can see right here where we attacked. No further attacks south of Pskov down to Veliky Luki, just establishing a defensive line here. More than likely this part of the front will be static for the foreseeable future, just strengthening our defensive lines as we trailed south here. What could be troubling is the enormous concentration of Soviet forces we've talked about in the earlier going. This elbow almost, well, it was becoming an elbow, this little salient almost, where the Soviets just amass great quantitudes of forces. So we have to be mindful of what they bring to bear along this long stretch of front that the Germans are establishing. We will have the very powerful 57th Panzer Corps, as well as the 3rd Panzer Corps, to have in reserve for the time being to see how the Soviets react to this shift of plans that the Germans are showing right now. We also have reconstituted, regrouped, and reorganized our infantry corps in and around Smolensk. This part of the front looks a little thin right now, but some of these divisions will be peeled off and inserted into the front to make it a little stronger in this gap. There was a lot of thought that took place as we withdrew our forces from this main axis of advance to reassemble them into a main line of resistance, and also selecting those formations to shift south for future operations. So shifting down a little bit here, we see that some Panzer Corps have been brought south, putting them on the rail lines just in case we have that option to rail them further south rather than move them overland and burn up gas. Same can be said with some of our infantry corps. I was really surprised at the enormous distance some of our infantry divisions were able to cover from here around Vyazma all the way down into the Bryansk sector. So it looks a little confused here, a mishmash of divisions and different color denominations based on which corps and army group they're assigned to, but we will continue to reconstitute, reorganize, and get settled in to attack positions in the next coming weeks. Moving further south, we see that we did finally commit the 24th Panzer Corps over, what is that river? Oh, the Norusa River. So we do have a bridgehead over across this river with the 24th Panzer Corps lead divisions ahead of all the other forces. Not much resistance that we're looking at right now, but the Soviets have some options to react to this. They could shift these forces that have been in this little finger-like salient, and more than likely, as we have seen when we're doing our aerial recon, the Soviets commonly build up operational reserves around the major cities and they shift them into the front. What we see here is only 2 possible divisions, but the bet is that the Soviets have more formations in and around Kursk to move west. Moving a little further south, here we have that battle that's been ongoing when we committed the 14th Panzer Corps and the 38th Panzer Corps. We had that failed encirclement that we attempted. The Soviets counterattacked south, coming south over the Seymen with very strong formations, almost all of them corps level formations. We counterattacked their counterattack, and we managed to rout 5 of their corps and also push them back over the Seymen. Take a look at some of the attacks that took place in this sector. Fairly successful, I would say. We have a breach in the Soviets' line. Speaking to the operational reserves that the Soviets commonly build up around the major cities, this originally showed as a question mark with 1 formation. But when this brave Slovakian mobile division moved next to Sumy, it quickly became, during reconnoitering the city, that they discovered 2 full Soviet rifle corps holding Sumy. So that was a little disappointing. Nonetheless, our flanks are fairly secure, with defending on the opposite bank of the Soviet forces to the north and to the south. So we have a breach here, and there's potential to exploit this breach in the Soviets' line alongside the bridgehead here over the Norusa River to finally maybe have an opportunity to encircle these Soviet forces that I have had my eye on for a while. Overall, I'm feeling better that we called a halt to the main axis of advance we had ongoing in Army Group Center's area operations, and I'm feeling pleased about our situation in the next coming weeks and the opportunities that they will present. One thing I'd like to point out, recently I've started to include 2 to 3 divisions of our own when we commit them to the attack. That is because since 1942, and we started to have those clear weather, solid ground turns, and we could actually attack, the Soviets have been holding out more often than not, and that is because in the past I've only used 1 German division. I've only selected 1 German division to make the attack, and more often than not in 1941, leading up into 1942, we've had some very favorable results. But because the Soviets have strengthened their forces and they've had that opportunity to build up those fortification levels, and we're encountering now corps level formations, committing a single division of our own into the attack has not been advantageous to us. More often than not, the Soviets have held out. So having much greater success committing 2, 3, even from multiple hexes into the attack, especially where it's critical and we cannot fail. That should be our SOP moving forward. Moving south, nothing has changed along this sector where the Hungarians are holding the front on the west bank. And what is this river? The Sula, the west bank of the Sula River. Soviets as well are taking up defensive positions. That massive buildup of Soviet tank formations around Poltava have dispersed, finding their way into the front. We saw some of that in a little bit of a bulge here, but they quickly uh, pulled their forces back and moved them north towards this threat. So we don't have that massive buildup of Soviet formations around Poltava any longer. We are now seeing them having arrived at the front. This is some of these formations here are the ones we're just speaking about, and they do pose a threat to the south here, where our line is a little thin. These forces in this bend of the front that's been there for so long, once the mud and once 1941 turned into 1942, really hasn't changed. But there are strong Soviet formations here, and it's just been a standoff, neither side really able to assert its dominance on the other. The Soviets did finally concede Cherkasy. They broke contact and withdrew. So now we have Cherkasy back in our control. And moving further south, finally I think 3rd Panzer Corps and 11th Army have the upper hand in this back and forth battle we've witnessed south of Kirovo Rog. We've pushed the Soviets all the way Kirovograd, I'll correct myself, south of Kirovograd, in and around, the battle is raging now in and around Kirovo Rog. So the Soviets have withdrawn here. There is a sole Soviet corps defending the Ingulets River, and that's all that's standing between 3rd Panzer, some portion of 11th Army, and Dnipropetrovsk. More than likely, the Soviets will break contact and withdraw. However, again, a Soviet operational reserve is identified here around Dnipropetrovsk, and we will quickly find that they will be arriving on the east bank of the Ingulets to take up a defensive position. That is all right, because the original plan for 11th Army and 3rd Panzer was to attack south and east to roll up the front and finally free up our poor Axis miners that have been facing off against Soviets across the river, and they just don't have the combat power to do anything about it. Especially when the Soviets have now, wrong button, established fort level 1s and 2s throughout, coupled with being on the opposite bank of a river. In summary, that is what has happened. And we'll look back again at the larger picture. The outlook, I don't have much concern about Army Group North in this part of the front. To include Pskov, it's this stretch south of Pskov to Veliky Luki that could cause concern, but more importantly, we have to watch out for the sector of the front from Veliky Luki to Smolensk. That is our thinnest stretch, which happens to be where the Soviets are at their densest force concentration. This could be troublesome. For that reason, we do have the 30th Panzer Corps and the 57th Panzer Corps ready to intercede should any trouble arise. Again, overall, I'm optimistic how this new shift in strategic initiatives is going to turn out for the Germans. We will have far greater success destroying Soviet formations south of Bryansk than we would have moving up north of Bryansk, Smolensk. The Soviets are just defending with everything but the kitchen sink in front of Moscow. And we saw that even with a great attacking power, that it was very difficult and arduous to get past layers and layers of Soviet formations defending in depth, establishing fortification levels that they built up during the close of 1941, during their winter offensive, and then the 3 to 4 weeks of mud. It was just really hard going. And we talked about why we decided to make the main axis of advance in Army Group Center's area of operations. It was just how 1941 concluded where our forces were arrayed. And with mud and blizzards, it's almost impossible to move mechanized formations any great distance without draining your fuel supply to zero. And it's so hard to accumulate fuel for the Germans this far east. We've been using airdrops as best we could every single turn. So making operational and strategic shifts of large German forces was not in the cards for us. So we essentially had to attack where they had ended up in 1941. The second argument to call a halt to this attack in and around Vyazma was to, at the end of 1942, have our Panzer Corps and our attacking infantry corps that we planned for future offensives in a much more desirable positions to conduct in an offensive in 1943, so that we're not having to shift our forces to attack positions prior to an attack. They will already be in and around our built-up areas just prior to the attack. That will save fuel and it will save time. So that is definitely a planning factor as 1942 comes to a close. We want to be in a good position offensively for 1943 prior to the constraints that are going to be applied to our movement with mud, blizzards, and even though we're back to normal rail capacity, let's take a look at that. 35,500. I haven't even taken advantage of any of those rail capacity points because I have no one to rail yet. We have just started to move our formations onto the rail lines for a shift south, and I didn't receive any reinforcements. We'd love to have that 34,500 points carry over to the next turn, but that's not the case. So those are unused railroad capacity points that are just left on the table. Next turn, we're going to make full use of them as we continue to shift formation south. This has been a long turn to execute, a lot of thinking taking place. So now we're at the point to click next turn. They have so many divisions that they're definitely going to be able to mass up and attack some of our formations. I'm expecting them to counterattack against 11th Army and 3rd Panzer, and to do something about that little rupture in their front around Sumy. My concern is they're going to be able to reinforce over the Ingulets before we get a bridgehead over there. Well, here we see our friendly partisans plopping down on our rail lines. Are we seeing a general withdrawal? We know that not all our counters are rendered on the map during the Soviets' execution, so it can be misleading. It can cause for false hopes and despair when really it doesn't look as bad as it seems. When we're like, hey, where'd all our divisions go? Well, they haven't been rendered on the map. Likewise, we see these great gaps in the Soviets' front, and we're like, wow, are they pulling back? But only to find out that no, they just weren't rendered. This is very interesting. This does look like a legitimate mass withdrawal on the Soviets' part in and around Kirovo Rog and Kirovograd. Will the Romanians finally be able to advance? Ooh. Oh, wow. This is wonderful. Do they not realize what's in and around Smolensk of our own? This could be a great opportunity. This could be a counterattack. The Soviets, maybe. Oh, no. Come on, Italians. Each and every one of you routed. Soviet aggression and their attacks can cause concern, but oftentimes they do lead to opportunity. I'm already thinking about what's happening around Smolensk. There we see the Soviet tank formations that were built up around Poltava have now made their way all the way north. Yeah, we have the 38th Panzer Corps, the 57th Panzer Corps. No, we don't have. We no longer have the 38th. Correct myself. We have the 30th Panzer Corps, and still some strong infantry divisions around Smolensk. There is definitely an opportunity there. We'll see what kind of protection the Soviets have on their flanks with that advance of theirs, just north and west of Smolensk. Always so interesting, the shape of the battlefield and the results and what it looks like after each of these turns. If you're thinking what I'm thinking right now, please no mud anywhere in any Soviet zone. Please no mud. 19,000. They had strong attacks, but we're under 20,000. That's good. They lost 210 tanks. 52,000. All right. Oh, I meant to point out, I forget if we already pointed this out, but when we finished that encirclement off here, along with other attacks, we caused over 100,000 losses to the Soviets that turn, which was really good. Let's take a quick peek here. Well, they're goners. They don't realize the combat power we still have here. Can we make it even more painful for the Soviets? Let's take a check with some aerial recon. maybe here, getting in and around. The Soviets really have nothing else behind this? I find that hard to believe. Well, the Soviets haven't even made contact with our withdrawing forces from last turn. Where was that other interesting development? Yeah, they routed the poor Italians. Apologize to put you in that position. Italian brothers. That was the counterattack where we were over the, I always forget these rivers, the Nerusa of 24th Panzer. Fairly strong forces to the north, coming out of Orel and Kursk, I imagine. We no longer see forces around Kursk. Let's do an aerial recon here as well. Nope, they seem to have been committed west. All right, we'll see what we can do here. Interesting. Soviets have pulled forces out of this finger. Yeah, absolutely. The Soviets are already all the way out to here in this swamp hex. So they've withdrawn. So maybe a missed opportunity to get these Soviet formations, but other opportunities will present themselves. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this update. It's going to get even more interesting the closing half of 1942. Thank you for watching. This is First Fire, not Assault Move Out.